Hello lovely people, kindly hit the subscribe button before we begin. Now let's begin. The first thing I learned about invisibility is that it isn't magic, it's mundane. When you're the woman who empties the trash cans after everyone has gone home, you might as well be a ghost. For 7 years, I haunted the gleaming offices of Reynolds Bailey Investment Group, watching the million-dollar decisions being made while I dusted the framed accolades on their walls. They never really looked at me. Not once. My name is Eleanor James, and I hold 2 master's degrees in finance and economics from Harvard. But to the executives whose coffee rings I wiped away each night, I was just the cleaning lady, if they acknowledged me at all. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Back in 2019, I had been on track. Top of my class, internship lined up at Goldman Sachs, my future stretching before me like a red carpet. Then my mother's multiple sclerosis took a sudden turn. The medical bills came in waves, drowning our family savings. My father had died years earlier, and my younger sister was still in high school. There was no one else. So I deferred my dreams and took the only night job that would accommodate my days spent caring for Mom. Cleaning offices paid in cash, required no questions, no resume. Just reliability and invisibility, both of which I could provide. "You're sure you don't mind working the downtown buildings?" my supervisor at Integrity Cleaning Services had asked during my interview, eyes narrowing slightly at my education credentials. "The financial district gets the most complaints. Those banker types can be." She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. "I can handle it," I assured her, not mentioning that I had once been destined to be one of those banker types. The irony wasn't lost on me when Reynolds Bailey was assigned to my rotation. The first night I walked into their offices, I recognized the name of the founder, William Bailey, from case studies I'd analyzed in grad school. His investment strategy during the 2008 financial crisis had been brilliant, coldly brilliant, but effective. His firm had not only survived but thrived while others crumbled. I still remember standing in his corner office that first night, staring at the view of the city lights, running my fingertips over the expensive leather chair where he made decisions that affected thousands of lives. Something settled in my stomach then, a plan, barely formed but persistent. I wasn't just going to clean these offices. I was going to study them. Every night for 7 years, I became the perfect observer. I arrived at 9 p.m. after the last ambitious associate had finally gone home. I emptied garbage cans full of discarded reports. I straightened desks where confidential documents were left in plain sight. I dusted computer screens still displaying financial models and acquisition plans. And I read everything. Photographed what I couldn't read quickly enough. Memorized patterns, strategies, client lists. I listened to the recordings of meetings accidentally left running on laptops. I knew which marriages were failing, which accounts were being embellished, which clients were being misled. The education I received cleaning those offices was worth more than both my Harvard degrees combined. I was a shadow enrolled in the most exclusive financial apprenticeship in America, and no one had any idea. "You've been here forever, haven't you?" James Bailey, the founder's son and current CEO, asked me one rare night when he was working late. His voice held the vague politeness of someone who doesn't expect a real answer. 7 years next month, sir, I replied, keeping my eyes appropriately downcast as I emptied his recycling bin. "Who?" He glanced up briefly from his computer. "Reliable. I like that." Then he was back to his spreadsheet, my existence forgotten before I'd even left the room. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been using their own investment strategies with the little money I managed to save. Starting with just $6,000, I'd built a portfolio worth over $1.2 million by mirroring their moves, but with nimbler timing. While caring for my mother by day and cleaning by night, I was building my escape, dollar by dollar. My plan had been simple: reach $2 million, then quit and start my own modest financial consulting business. I could have continued indefinitely if Zoe Chen hadn't been hired as their new head of security. Unlike her predecessors, Zoe actually reviewed the security footage. She noticed patterns. Like how I spent too long at certain desks. How I sometimes took photos of documents. How I occasionally used the computers after hours. I knew something was wrong the moment I swiped my cleaning card that night and found James Bailey, 2 security guards, and an unfamiliar Asian woman waiting for me in the darkened lobby. "Ms. James," Bailey said, his usual distraction replaced with laser focus. "Or should I say, Ms. Eleanor James, Harvard Business School, class of 2019? I believe we need to have a conversation about exactly what you've been doing in our offices after hours." My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. 7 years of careful work, discovered. My secret exposed. As they escorted me to the conference room, I clutched my cleaning cart handle, wondering if I was headed for jail, or something worse. The conference room felt colder than usual that night. Maybe it was the air conditioning that typically stayed off during my cleaning hours. Maybe it was the ice in James Bailey's stare as he spread printouts of my nighttime activities across the mahogany table. 7 years, he said, tapping a manicured finger on a security still frame of me photographing a document. 7 years of corporate espionage right under our noses. I sat perfectly still, my cleaning uniform suddenly feeling like a poor disguise rather than the perfect cover it had been for so long. The woman, Zoe Chen, as she'd curtly introduced herself, stood by the door as if I might attempt to flee. "I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with here," Bailey continued. "Are you working for Morgan Stanley? Goldman? Or is it one of the hedge funds?" A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "I'm not working for anyone but myself and Integrity Cleaning." "Bullshit," snapped Bailey, the veneer of corporate politeness cracking. "You've systematically gathered confidential information for years. Nobody does that without a buyer." I straightened my shoulders, shedding the subservient posture I perfected over the years. "I never sold a single piece of information. Not one." "Then what?" "I used it," I interrupted, shocking myself with my boldness. "I used the information to make my own investments. Small ones at first, then bigger as I learned your patterns." The silence that followed was thunderous. Bailey exchanged glances with Chen, disbelief evident on both their faces. "Show me," Bailey finally said. Under their watchful eyes, I pulled out my phone and logged into my brokerage account. I slid it across the table, watching as Bailey's eyes widened at the balance, $1,247,392.16. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "You did this cleaning toilets?" That stung more than it should have. I did this with a Harvard education in finance and economics, 2 degrees I'm still paying off while taking care of my mother with Ms. The toilet cleaning was just how I gained access to the information. For the first time, Bailey really looked at me. Not as a service worker, not as a threat, but as a person with a story he hadn't bothered to know. "You're that Eleanor James?" Chen suddenly asked from the doorway. "The one who published that paper on predictive modeling for market volatility?" My head snapped toward her, surprised. "You've read my work." "Required reading at MIT's finance program," she replied, her expression softening slightly. "Everyone wondered why you disappeared." The explanation stuck in my throat. "How do you tell strangers that life collapsed around you? That your brilliant future evaporated because America's healthcare system bankrupts families? That sometimes invisibility is the only survival strategy available?" "My mother got sick," I said simply. "Someone had to take care of her." Bailey was scrolling through my transaction history. "These moves, they mirror our strategies, but with adjustments. Sometimes better timing than our own." He looked up, confusion evident. "Why didn't you just apply for a job here? With your credentials?" I couldn't contain the harsh laugh. "I did. 3 times. Your HR department never even called me for an interview." His face reddened slightly. "That's impossible. With Harvard credentials." With a 2-year gap in my resume to care for a sick parent, I corrected him. "And maybe, just maybe, because the name Eleanor James on a resume doesn't conjure the image of someone who looks like me." I gestured to my dark skin, the hair I kept in protective braids for practicality. Understanding dawned slowly in his eyes, followed by discomfort he quickly masked. "I needed income that worked around my mother's care schedule. Nighttime cleaning fit. I thought it would be temporary." I traced a pattern on the table's surface. Then one night, I saw a prospectus left open on an associate's desk for that pharmaceutical merger, Brennan and Keyes. I recognized the pattern from my studies. I invested my entire savings, $6,000. When it paid off, I kept going. That's still illegal, Chen pointed out, though her tone lacked conviction. Technically, yes, I acknowledged. But I never took documents, never compromised client information, never damaged the firm. I just learned. Applied the knowledge. Isn't that what we're all supposed to do with education? Bailey stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights that had kept me company all these years. Do you know what today is, Ms. James? He asked without turning. Thursday, I replied, confused by the non sequitur. It's the anniversary of my father's death. He turned back to me. 3 years ago today. I was thinking about him when Zoe brought me this security concern. Wondering if I was running his company the way he would have wanted. I remained silent, unsure where this was heading. My father started this firm with $10,000 he'd scraped together driving cabs at night while getting his business degree, Bailey continued. Everyone told him he couldn't compete with the established firms. He proved them wrong through sheer determination and by seeing patterns others missed. He tapped my phone. Sound familiar? My heart was racing now, but not from fear. Something else was happening in this room, something unexpected. You should sue me, I said quietly. That's what any reasonable CEO would do. Probably, he agreed, then smiled thinly. But my father wasn't particularly reasonable. He was effective. He valued results over conventional wisdom. And he would have been impressed by what you've managed to do. He sat back down, studying me with new interest. How is your mother now? The question caught me off guard. Stable. The new medications help. She lives with me. Bailey nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Chen. Zoe, could you give us a moment? She hesitated, then nodded and stepped out, closing the door softly behind her. Bailey leaned forward. I'm going to make you an offer, Ms. James. Not because I'm feeling charitable, but because letting talent like yours walk out the door, or worse, into a competitor's arms, would be the poorest investment decision I've made in years. I held my breath as he continued. I'm prepared to offer you a position as a junior investment strategist. Starting salary commensurate with your experience, both formal and unorthodox. In exchange, you sign an NDA about your activities here and agree to certain restrictions on your personal investments going forward. I blinked rapidly, certain I'd misheard him. You're offering me a job? After what I did? His smile was calculating. I'm offering you a job because of what you did. Anyone can get a Harvard degree if they have the money. Not everyone can turn cleaning access into $1 million portfolio through sheer analytical skill. He slid a business card across the table. Think about it overnight. Call my assistant in the morning to schedule a proper interview. If you're half as good at financial analysis as you are at corporate espionage, you'll be a valuable asset. As I stood on shaking legs, still clutching my phone with its evidence of my secret life, Bailey added one final comment, oh, and Ms. James. If you do join us, please bring that paper on predictive modeling. I'd like to read it. I stepped out into the night, the business card burning in my pocket, wondering if I'd just been offered salvation or a different kind of prison. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table staring at James Bailey's business card while my mother ate breakfast. The early light caught the embossed lettering, his name in raised silver against stark white. A stark contrast to the laminated ID badge I'd worn for 7 years that simply read cleaning staff. You're quiet this morning, Ellie, Mom said, reaching across to touch my hand. Despite her illness, her eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. Did something happen at work? How could I possibly explain? That I'd been caught. That instead of being arrested, I'd been offered what I once dreamed of. That after 7 years of invisibility, someone had finally seen me. They found out who I am, I said simply. She nodded slowly, unsurprised. My mother had always believed my intelligence would eventually be recognized, even when I'd stopped believing it myself. And they offered me a job. A real one. In finance. Her smile was radiant. It's about time. 2 hours later, I sat in the same conference room where I'd been interrogated the night before, but everything was different. I wore the only business suit I owned, purchased for interviews that never materialized years ago, now slightly dated but still professional. My resume lay on the table between myself and 3 executives, James Bailey, Zoe Chen, and a silver-haired man introduced as Lawrence Winters, the firm's chief investment officer. "Your portfolio performance is impressive," Winters said, studying printouts of my trading history. "Particularly your pivot during the pandemic market volatility. Many established investors missed that opportunity. I had unique insight into your strategies," I reminded them, refusing to minimize what I'd done. "I saw the emergency planning meetings you held on Zoom. I cleaned the whiteboards after your strategy sessions." Winters smiled thinly. "Yes, but you also improved on our moves. That biotech short in August 2022, we didn't make that call. That was your original insight. The research was there in the discarded reports," I explained. "You were looking at the wrong metrics. The clinical trial data showed patterns similar to 3 previous failed drugs in that category." Chen leaned forward. "You recognized statistical patterns from scattered reports that even our analysts missed." I shrugged. "When you clean offices for 7 years, you develop a unique perspective. You see the whole picture, not just departmental silos." The interview continued for 2 hours. They tested my knowledge, challenged my thinking, and probed the ethical boundaries of what I'd done. I answered honestly, refusing to apologize for surviving the only way I could. "One last question," Bailey said finally. "Why should we trust you? You systematically exploited our company for years." I met his gaze directly. "I didn't exploit your company. I learned from it. And you should trust me for the same reason I should trust you not to call the authorities the moment this interview ends. Because we both recognize value when we see it." The silence stretched between us until Bailey smiled, a genuine smile, not the calculated one from the night before. "Welcome to Reynolds and Bailey, Ms. James. You start Monday." My transition from invisible cleaner to visible investment strategist wasn't seamless. On my first official day, I rode the elevator with associates who'd never acknowledged my existence before. They stared at my employee badge, confusion evident. "Didn't you used to?" one began awkwardly. "Empty your trash?" "Yes." I smiled pleasantly as the elevator doors opened to our floor. "I particularly enjoyed the love letters you kept sending to someone named Jessica, who wasn't your wife. Always properly recycled though, very environmentally conscious." His face blanched as I stepped out, head high. The whispers started immediately. The cleaning lady who'd become an investment strategist overnight. The spy in their midst. The diversity hire. I heard them all. What they didn't know was that I'd spent 7 years being underestimated. It had become my superpower. Within my first month, I'd identified a market inefficiency in agricultural commodities that our competitors had missed. By the end of my first quarter, my investment recommendations had generated $4.3 million in profits. "They're starting to call you with a night watchman downstairs," Chen told me one evening as we worked late on a new strategy. We'd developed an unlikely friendship, both of us used to being underestimated in different ways. "Better than what they used to call me," I replied. Which was nothing at all. "Bailey wants to put you on the Westridge account," she continued. "It's their biggest client." My fingers paused over my keyboard. "That's Jonathan Reed's account." Reed was notorious for refusing to work with women or people of color. His business represented nearly $200 million in assets under management. "Exactly," Chen smiled wickedly. "Bailey thinks your unique perspective might be just what the account needs." When I met Reed the following week, his disdain was immediate and obvious. "No offense, but I requested Lawrence Winters handle my portfolio personally." "Mr. Winters is handling your overall strategy," I explained calmly. "I've been assigned to analyze emerging opportunities specifically suited to your risk tolerance profile." "And what would you know about my profile?" he scoffed. I slid a folder across the table. That you keep a picture of your first dollar earned in your wallet. That you check your portfolio exactly 12 times each day. That you're terrified of inflation because you lived through the 70s. That you drink Macallan 18 but tell people it's 25 to appear more successful. And that you've missed approximately $42 million in potential gains over the past 5 years due to your unconscious bias against certain market sectors. His face reddened. How could you possibly? I cleaned your office for 7 years, Mr. Reed. I emptied your trash, wiped your fingerprints from your desk, and listened while you shouted into your phone thinking no one important could hear you. I know more about your financial anxieties than your therapist does. The meeting that followed was the most productive of Reed's relationship with the firm. 6 months later, his portfolio under my guidance had increased by 14% during a market that had grown only 3%. At home, changes came too. I hired a full-time nurse for Mom, moved us to a house with wheelchair accessibility, and finally paid off my student loans. The physical burden eased, but the emotional one remained, the constant awareness that my success had come through methods others might never understand. One evening, almost a year after my promotion, I was working late when the cleaning crew arrived. A young woman with tired eyes began emptying trash cans, keeping her gaze lowered just as I once had. "Excuse me," I said, causing her to startle. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Amora." "Amora," I repeated. "I'm Eleanor. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." Her confusion was evident, but she nodded. As we sat in my office, the same one I had once cleaned, I asked about her education, her dreams, her circumstances. "Engineering," she said quietly. "I was studying civil engineering in Nigeria before." She trailed off. Before life intervened, I finished for her. Understanding passed between us, the universal language of derailed potential. That night I created a new proposal for Bailey, a scholarship and mentorship program for support staff with advanced education or exceptional potential. Not charity, I insisted when presenting it. Talent acquisition at its most efficient. The people who clean your offices might be the ones who should be running them. Bailey studied the proposal, then looked up at me with that calculating expression I'd come to recognize. "How much?" $2 million annually. Tax deductible as a foundation. He signed the authorization without hesitation. "Make it work, Eleanor. Find me more people like you." The program launched 6 months later. Amora was its first recipient, transitioning to our engineering department while completing her degree. Others followed, the security guard with a mathematics background, the cafeteria worker with an economics degree from her home country, the parking attendant who coded in 5 languages. On the 7th anniversary of my promotion, 14 years after I first walked into Reynolds and Bailey with a cleaning cart, I stood before the assembled company as Bailey announced my appointment as the firm's new chief strategy officer. "Eleanor James represents the best of this company's values," he told the crowded atrium. "She reminds us that talent doesn't always arrive in expected packages." As applause filled the room, I scanned the faces before me. The cleaning staff stood at the back, visible, invited specifically for this announcement. Among them was my mother in her wheelchair, tears streaming down her face. Later that evening, I returned to the office floor alone. I walked to the supply closet where I'd once stored my cleaning supplies and opened it with the master key I now possessed. It remained largely unchanged, mops, buckets, cleaning solutions all neatly arranged. I ran my fingers along the metal shelf where I'd hidden my phone on countless nights, photographing documents when no one was watching. The shelf where I'd stashed power bars on long nights when hunger gnawed but I couldn't afford dinner. From my bag, I retrieved the laminated, cleaning staff ID I'd kept all these years and hung it on the inside of the closet door, my own private memorial to invisibility and persistence. "Miss James." A voice startled me. I turned to find the night security guard, one of the few who had always greeted me by name during my cleaning years. "Just reminiscing, Anthony," I explained, closing the closet door. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Some of us always saw you, you know. Even before." "I know," I replied softly. "Those were the people who kept me going." As I gathered my things to leave, I passed James Bailey's office one last time. Through the glass, I could see him working late, surrounded by reports much like those I'd once studied by the glow of my phone's flashlight. The cleaning woman, Maria, I knew her name now, nodded respectfully as she entered his office. Bailey looked up and did something I'd never seen during my 7 years of cleaning. He smiled, greeted her by name, and moved his papers to make her job easier. Small changes. Invisible becoming visible. The world shifting one recognition at a time. Outside, the night spread before me as I walked to my car, no longer taking the bus, no longer invisible. Tomorrow I would make decisions affecting billions of dollars. Tonight, I would go home to the mother who had never stopped believing this day would come. 7 years cleaning. 7 years rising. The symmetry felt right somehow, as though my life had always been building toward this perfect balance of darkness and light, of being unseen and finally, irrevocably seen. Thank you for following this story. Kindly hit the subscribe button and leave your comments below on how you feel.